I'd like to ask you about native web components if you don't mind, because this comes up a lot around here and they sound really awesome from what I hear. But I don't understand. You've talked about how they're framework agnostic and how the code that you make with those will last a long time and you'll be able to adapt it to various things. Why isn't every other framework like that and able to be used with every other framework? And if they're so good, then why isn't everybody just developing native web components? And like, why are they so much better apparently than everything else? And then why aren't people just using them then?
I'll say, why aren't everybody using them from uh, like a popularity standpoint? Is that they don't have as good a PR as as Angular and some of these larger JavaScript frameworks that are backed by Facebook and Google. That's the popularity contest.
Well, first, I think it's important to understand the con. Like these native web components have been around even before a lot of real popular frameworks. Like they predate React. It's just that specs are kind of hard, right? Because you have what should work and then you have what does work in browsers, right? And so what does work for the longest time have been JavaScript frameworks that kind of like filled the gap of what should work. Well, now the should and the do are kind of like married together in native web components, and that we have all this stuff that has come down from the spec and is now supported in browsers. And so it's a great time to support using native web components in your applications because of all the adoption by browsers and all the adoption that's coming in future years as well. So it's ubiquitous, and we know that because it's part of the spec, it's not going to change very easily. Like that's the blessing and the curse, right? It's like it takes so long to get there, but once it gets there, it's not going to be dumped, right? So whereas like JavaScript frameworks, there's like a rewrite every couple of years, and you've got to figure out how to do all these things that you were used to doing a different way. And so that's the pro and the con, right? It's like now that it's ubiquitous, it's going to stay a while, and so we can leverage that, and we can latch onto that longevity and build something for the future.
Feel like the
Yeah,
con you gave was not like you were giving a past con. That's like
Yeah,
over now.
exactly. Yeah, the con actually kind of brought JavaScript frameworks to the forefront, right? Like
yeah.
React and Angular, like they were created to supplement some of the things that weren't supported yet for web components. Like just the idea of being able to do all these things in an abstracted way and make these componentized, pieces of functionality and reuse them. And so now that we have native web components, a lot of all that overhead is no longer necessary. Like it was funny, we could even write some native web components that are smaller than what React actually ships to the browser, right? So like especially for things that need to consider page speed or even like SEO, using native web components is actually like really beneficial because you're cutting out all this overhead that's no longer necessary.
Sounds like there are no cons then. Like why in are there any cons? Should just everybody be switching to native web components all the time?
So there's definitely some things from a development standpoint that still necessitate a JavaScript framework, especially large applications or enterprise applications where you want to abstract large amounts of the functionality. So things like state management, things like server-side rendering, those aren't quite up to par with what we're used to with JavaScript frameworks. So we like to use native web components as kind of like that UI layer that you can slot in whatever JavaScript framework on top of those web components. And it's kind of like a great marriage of the two, right? So native web components for UI, and maybe, we call them dumb components in some ways. They're not dumb. It's just that we've taken a lot of that application logic out of it so you can reuse them as most efficient as possible. And then with the understanding that you're still building an application in maybe whatever framework you want. So you'll handle those particular challenges at the framework level and use the native web components for more of the branding of the app.